The fight in Congress to reform how the nation's police officers go about their jobs has reinvigorated a discussion over so-called qualified immunity, a controversial federal doctrine that protects officers accused of violating the Constitution while on duty. While abolishing the more than 50-year-old doctrine remains one of the main sticking points between Republicans and Democrats over any deal on passing the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. A look at reform efforts around the country shows that several states have forged ahead with eliminating the protection. Since Floyd was killed last May by then Minnesota police officer Derek Chauvin, at least 25 states have taken up the issue and considered some form of qualified immunity reform, including Colorado, New Mexico, Connecticut and Massachusetts, which have passed legislation to end or restrict the defense, according to the National Conference of State Legislatures. The once obscure federal doctrine, which can be abolished across the country only by the Supreme Court or Congress, became a new target for reform in the wake of Floyd's killing. At the federal level, the issue has been a point of contention for Democratic and Republican lawmakers. But the Chauvin conviction this week has already reignited bipartisan talks to advance police reform legislation in Congress. Prospects for two bills introduced by Democrats have been largely unclear due to an overwhelming lack of GOP support. The George Floyd bill, which passed in the House in March, would end qualified immunity for all local, state and federal law enforcement officers, but it does not have the 60 votes required to advance in the Senate in its current form. Separately, the Ending Qualified Immunity Act has also been introduced by House Democrats and would apply to all state and local government officials, including law enforcement, but its prospects are slim. The issue has been a source of contention for Democrats and Republicans in Congress, but on Wednesday, Republican Sen. Tim Scott of South Carolina offered a compromise that has given new optimism about the bill's prospects. Police departments should be held financially liable in civil suits, not the individual officers. Qualified immunity, established by the Supreme Court in 1967, effectively protects state and local officials, including police officers, from personal liability unless they are determined to have violated what the court defines as an individual's clearly established statutory or constitutional rights. The doctrine can be used only in civil cases, not criminal, and allows victims to sue officials for damages only under those circumstances. Critics and reform advocates say that the doctrine gives officers free rein to use excessive force with impunity and argue that what it defines as clearly established law remains largely elusive and difficult to prove, as it requires the victim to present a previous case with nearly identical circumstances that a court ruled as unconstitutional. They also assert the law helps officers escape accountability and prevents victims from achieving justice. Law enforcement officials and defenders of the doctrine have pushed back against legislative efforts, arguing that police officers should be able to do their jobs without fear of being sued or being held civilly liable for incidents that occur while carrying out their duties. Federal civil rights laws are more powerful in terms of compensating victims and providing meaningful remedies for people whose rights have been violated, which makes it more important that the federal law change, according to Brandon Garrett, professor of law at Duke University School of Law and faculty director of the school's Wilson Center for Science and Justice. For decades, everyone just accepted that qualified immunity was a given because it was unlikely to change on the federal level, said Alexander Reinert, a professor at Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law at Yeshiva University who authored a recent study on the doctrine. What this new legislative activity from the states shows is that there's actually a role for states to play in reforming this doctrine. They are deciding that the harms of qualified immunity far outweigh whatever benefits the doctrine provides. The anticipated results, according to Reinert, will be more accountability among police officers and greater protection of rights for victims of constitutional violations, and courts will be better positioned to clearly establish the law.